I'm the one who, when Jesus asked, who do men think that I am, or who do you think that I am, I responded that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he told me that I have the kingdom of heaven, that whoever I rebuke will be rebuked, whoever I bring up will be brought up. I can imagine St. John chiming in and saying, I'm his beloved. I have a special place in his heart. I sit next to him. I'm the greatest. I can imagine even Judas chiming in and saying, you know what? I have the money box. He trusts me with the money. That's not a small thing. Out of all the 12, I'm the one who's trusted the most. And the discussion goes on and on. You can imagine the rest of the 12 also chiming in this discussion. It's a simple question. Who's the greatest? Have you ever had that discussion? Who's the greatest president? Is it Lincoln? Is it Washington? Is it Roosevelt? Who's the best cook in church? At Dauzuma, who makes the best mashi? I want to be the judge, okay? Who's the best deacon? Who knows all the hymns the best? Who knows the Bible the best? Who's the best at interpreting the Bible? Okay, so those are kind of church subjects. Who's better, Michael or LeBron? Michael. Who's the best team ever? Is it Michael Jordan's Bulls, or is it the Heat, or is it Magic with the Lakers? Or we just finished the World Cup. Who's better, Messi or Ronaldo? Was it Spain 4 years ago, or was it Germany this year? Who's the best quarterback? Eli? Tom Brady? Let's go back to the disciples a little bit, because none of these questions you can have an answer to. You can never actually decide who's better unless you can actually have them play each other or have an actual contest or something. Let's look at the disciples. That discussion that we just imagined the disciples having of who's the best. Do you want to be hard on the disciples? Do you want to come down really hard on the disciples and say, wait a minute, what happened to the first will be last and the last will be first, or you should be the servant of all, or let others go first and put yourself last? And what happened to all this? Weren't they listening to Jesus and all these wonderful sermons and all the times that Jesus was preaching to them? What's wrong with these people? Weren't they listening? This is where I want to say, I want you to think differently about this whole situation. Okay? Don't judge the disciples. Absolutely do not judge them. I want you to think, was this a bad question? Was this a bad discussion that they were having? Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Is that really so bad to be having that discussion? Well, let's look at Jesus' answer to them. Did Jesus rebuke them? Did Jesus scold them? Did he tell them, get behind me, Satan, and don't have this discussion? Did Jesus do that? No, he didn't. Not at all. As a matter of fact, Jesus actually answered them, and he told them how to be the greatest. What did he tell them? He told them, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. If it was a bad discussion, if it was a bad question, he would have really come down hard on them. He's not afraid of them, right? We've seen Jesus come down hard on them before, but he didn't. He actually told them how to do it. He told them how to be the greatest. As a matter of fact, it may not even be the first time that Jesus had a discussion about being the greatest of something. Didn't Jesus talk about St. John the Baptist and say, there is no greater prophet than John the Baptist? He called St. John the Baptist the greatest prophet. And then he continued on even and said, and the least in the kingdom of God is greater than he. Again, a discussion of who's greater. St. John the Baptist is the greatest prophet, but the least in the kingdom of heaven is even greater than he. So this whole discussion of greatness, I don't think it's such a bad discussion. I don't think it's such a bad thing to want. Can I confess in front of all of you? I want to be the greatest. I hope you do too. When I was in school, I wanted to be the greatest. I wanted to get straight A's in every subject. I tried. Didn't always succeed, but I tried. When I got married, I wanted to be the greatest husband there ever was. You can ask Maggie about how I'm doing on that one. When I had kids, I wanted to be the greatest father that ever was. Don't ask my kids. Today, right now, I want to be the greatest sermon giver ever. Don't ask. Nothing wrong with wanting to be the greatest. as long as my motivation is not my ego and my pride. As long as my motivation is that I want to be the best at what I'm doing, that I want to do my best and try my hardest at whatever task I'm given. Absolutely, absolutely nothing wrong with wanting to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. What's my motivation? I want to go to heaven. I want to be great in heaven. Of course I want to be the greatest. What is the key? And a very important question here. What is the key then to be the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And as I said, Jesus answered that question. He took a little child, brought him in front of the disciples and said, whoever humbles himself like this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. So in order to be the greatest, I need to be humble. The secret to greatness is humility. Second thing I want to change your mind about. Humility is one of the most misunderstood things about Christianity, period. As a matter of fact, I think humility is one of the most misunderstood things in our culture, period. And by our culture, sorry, I'm thinking mainly of American culture. Being humble has nothing to do with being shy. Being humble has nothing to do with being weak, or with being timid, or with being insecure. None of those things describe being humble. An insecure person doesn't do things that a humble person does. Jesus was humble. Jesus was the best example that we have of how to be humble. And Jesus was not weak. Jesus was not shy. He was not timid. He was not insecure. An insecure person will not bend down and wash his disciples' feet. That's not what an insecure person does. It takes a very confident person to do that. A shy person will not stand and speak boldly in front of the Pharisees, the leaders, and tell them they're wrong. That is not a shy person. A weak person will not show the self-control and restraint that Jesus showed when he was mocked, when he was beaten, when he was humiliated by them. An insecure person will not heal on the Sabbath in front of the Pharisees, knowing very well that he's going to upset them, and they're going to come back and tell him, wait a minute, why did you pick to heal on the Sabbath? Couldn't you wait the other 6 days? An insecure person will absolutely not do that. A weak, an insecure, a shy person cannot be humble. That's part of the problem. Our society confuses those traits with humility. It's actually the opposite. A humble person needs to be strong, needs to have strong willpower, needs to be bold. I think this is my last thing I want to change your mind about. Humility is not a feeling. Humility is not something I feel. And I'll prove it to you. In the Bible, we are commanded to be humble. Absolutely. The Bible commands me to be humble. Can God command me how I feel? I don't think God is that unfair that He can force me to feel. No. I can't be commanded to feel something. I cannot be commanded to be happy. I cannot be commanded to be sad. No. To be humble is something I choose to be. It's a choice I make in how I live my life and how I think and how I act. It's not a feeling. It's how I act. And I'll talk about that in a second. But C.S. Lewis, the great Christian writer, had a very important quote about humility that I think is very important to remember, and you may have heard this before. He said, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. So a humble person is not a person who thinks that I'm terrible, I'm no good, I'm useless, I'm horrible, I'm nothing, I'm worthless. No, that's not what a humble person is. A humble person knows their abilities. A humble person knows their skill, knows their talents. But a humble person is not going to put themselves first. Puts themselves last. So a humble person is not thinking less of yourself, it is thinking of yourself less. A humble person is thinking about God and others first, before yourself. Living a life of humility, of being humble, will lead you to having joy in your life, will lead you to having a stress-free life. 2 secrets to living a humble life. First one is to be humble between you and God. The second one is to be humble between yourself and those around you. 2 simple relationships. Your relationship with God, you need to be humble. And your relationship with others, you need to be humble. So the first one, I need to be humble between my relationship with myself and with God. Without that humility between my relationship with myself and God, I cannot be humble with those around me. It's not that hard. God is everything. I would be nothing without God. That's not a feeling of humility. That's truth. That's a fact. I would not be standing here before you today unless God wanted me to be standing here before you today. I would not be anything in my life unless God wanted me to be that. I would not have the job I have today. I would not have the wife I have today. I would not have the children I have today. I would not have anything I have. I would not have the dollar I have in my bank account today if God didn't want me to have it. That's a simple truth. But it's a very important thing for you to understand. That there's nothing that you have that God did not give it to you. And because of that, then what do I have to feel proud about? It's what He gave me. Whatever skill or talent or ability or whatever that you have in your life, it's because God gave it to you. What do you have to feel proud about? He gave it to you. Feel humble before Him. It's interesting that the example that Jesus gave is a little child, as His description for humility. He said, you need to be as humble as this little child. Think about a little child, an infant. If that child is hungry, he cries. If that child needs to be changed, his diaper changed, he cries. If he wants to play, he cries. If he wants anything in his life, he cries. What's he crying to? Who is he crying to? He's crying to mom and dad, right? Mainly mom, sometimes dad. That's the example that Jesus is giving us. You need to have that level of humility that when you need something, you cry to God. And when I say cry to God, I don't mean shed tears and cry to God. I mean, go to God and cry to Him and say, God, I need this. God, I need that. God, I need this. When is the last time you cried to God? And again, I don't mean sit in front of God and just shed tears. I mean, God, I need you. God, I'm hungry. God, I need a change, not diapers, in your life. God, I need to eat. Whatever. When is the last time you cried to God? But let me qualify that. When was the last time you cried to God first? See, this is what we do. I try to do it myself. Try to get my friends to help me. I try to go to my wife and have her help me. I try to go to strangers and they help me. And none of that works, then I say, okay, God, I'm at my end. None of this is working. God, please help me. Is that what the child does? No, he goes to dad first. He goes to mom first. When is the last time that you had a problem and you went to God first and stopped there and depended on God to solve your problem instead of depending on yourself and others to solve your problem for you? When's the last time you had this alone time with God? Private, quiet, alone time. Pouring out your heart to Him without any distractions. And just poured out your heart. God, this is what I need. This is who I am. This is my situation. Standing before God will lead to humility. Time with people will lead to pride. Time with people will lead to the discussion of who's the greatest. That's a waste of time. I told you there's nothing wrong with wanting to be the greatest, but sitting and discussing who's the greatest, that's a waste of time. Striving to be the greatest in heaven, that's not a waste of time. But discussing it can lead to pride. Standing before God with His angels around Him and the cherubim and the seraphim and singing glory, glory, glory. holy, 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 I have to feel small in the presence of that glory. There's no way that I'm standing in front of God and I'm not humbled. So I want you each to ask yourselves, how did you depend on God this past week? I want to ask you this past year. I want to ask you today, just this past week. When did you completely depend on God this past week? When did you show God that you completely depend on Him, that you completely rely on Him? When did you cry to God this past week? Let's go to the second side of humility. That I need to show humility to those around me. What's the best way to show humility? To say I'm sorry when I do something wrong. Admit your mistakes. It's a great saying. It says, my temper gets me in trouble. My pride keeps me in trouble. It's not just my temper who gets me in trouble, though. It's my stupidity, my decisions, my dumb acts. Those things get me in trouble. It's my pride, though, that always keeps me from apologizing. How many big arguments and fights did you have in your life that could have been avoided if just one person in the argument said, I'm sorry? The problem is we have this image of ourselves that we're perfect, that we're smart, that we're wise. Guess what? This is the one note I want you to take today. If you're writing down notes, write it down. Write this down. You are not perfect. Is this a shock to anybody? Guess what? Everybody around you already knows you're not perfect. You're the only one who thinks people think you're not perfect. You know you're not perfect, they know you're not perfect, but we walk around life trying to pretend that everybody thinks I'm still perfect. Everybody knows you're not perfect. Your coworkers know you're not perfect. Your friends know you're not perfect. Your parents know you're not perfect. Your teachers know you're not perfect. Your boss at work knows you're not perfect. For sure, your kids know you're not perfect. My wife for sure knows I'm not perfect. Your husband knows you're not perfect. Your wife knows you're not perfect. Guarantee it. And guess what? Since everybody around you already knows you're not perfect, there is nothing wrong with you saying, I'm sorry, I screwed up. Nothing wrong with admitting you made a mistake. You notice one of the things I said to you that is your kids know you're not perfect? Saying sorry to your kids is not a horrible thing to do. Saying sorry to your kids actually teaches them humility. It also teaches them accountability, that when I make a mistake, I admit it. How in the world do you want your kids to admit that they made a mistake if they've never heard you ever admitting you've made a mistake? Think about that. Think of a simple situation that we may encounter all the time. I'm driving my car, and I cut off, I change lanes or something, and the guy next to me gets really upset with me because I cut him off. And he's angry, and he kind of honks his horn, and I get mad at him, and he gets mad at me, and then we meet at the red light, and he's looking at me, and I'm looking at him, and he's looking at me, and I'm looking at him, and you know what's going to happen next, right? I roll down my window, and I say, I'm sorry. I think I may have cut you off there. And he responds, yeah, I may have been going too fast. I may have been following you too close. Situation's over. Problem resolved. By the way, you probably have a cross hanging from your rearview mirror. Probably a good idea to apologize. Show him what a true Christian is like. How many fights in your life could you have avoided by saying, I'm sorry, instead of defending your actions? And when I say saying I'm sorry, I'm talking about a sincere, heartfelt apology. My kids are not here, so I can tell you this. When one of my kids had a fight with one of their brothers or sisters, tell your sister you're sorry. So what does my kids do? I am sorry that you're so stupid. That's not the apology I'm talking about. I'm talking about a sincere apology from your heart that you did something wrong. I don't know of a single situation where two people are fighting where one is completely wrong and the other one is 100% completely right. I don't think this situation's ever happened. In any fight between any two people, there is a percentage of blame that falls on each party. That's why we have a fight. So each person, I guarantee you, has something that they're responsible for that they can apologize for. So let's go back to what we talked about. Spending time with God will help you realize that only He is perfect, and it will lead you to have that humility towards others. True humility. There is nothing worse than false humility. False humility is rooted in pride, and we want to get rid of that pride in our lives. In Proverbs it says, pride goes before destruction, and the haughty spirit before the fall. Haughty meaning arrogant. So pride goes before destruction, so pride will lead to destruction, and arrogance will lead to a fall. Only a true humble person is confident in his abilities and uses them to help others. Last Sunday, the gospel reading was about power. That God has given us power over serpents and scorpions. What is that power? That power is in James chapter 4, where he says, God resists the proud and gives grace to the humble. That grace is the power of God in my life. God resists the proud and gives grace to the humble. So if I get rid of my pride and I become humble, God gives me His grace. And that grace is the power of God in my life. That's the same power that raises the dead. That's the same power that heals the sick. That's the same power that moves mountains. And that's how living a life of humility leads to what I talked about in the beginning. A life of blessing, a life of power, of joy, a life of victory. So I just wanted to leave you with one quote at the end. And it's a quote from John Wooden. And if you don't know who John Wooden is a basketball coach, a college basketball coach, who coached UCLA, and he won, I believe it was 12 championships in 13 years. He should be proud, right? His quote is, talent is God-given. Be humble. Fame, being famous, is man-given. Be grateful. Pride is self-given. Pride is self-given. Be careful. And glory be to God forever. Amen.
Choice in